Well, notwithstanding studying in Massachusetts, did most of his education at the university level at Purdue in Indiana, and then loving winter as much as he did, he moved to Florida and spent most of his career at the University of Florida and at Mississippi State, where in both locations he was he's an agricultural sociologist, and so he spent his time in departments of agricultural economics, and at Florida ran the Department of Family, Youth, and Community Services, and was the acting chair of the Department of 4-H Youth Department. But then, because he missed the cold weather so much, he moved back to his alma mater, Purdue, where he now heads up a magnificent center, which we agreed he would tell you a little bit about. Because the wonderful thing about the center is and this referred to a conversation that we were having last night at dinner. It's a very nice bringing together of groups very much like you, of academics and business people, and of contribution to communities, and so we're delighted to have him here to speak with us today. So please join me in welcoming Beaulieu.
Hey, Scott, would you mind passing these out? Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Come on. All right. We know, I'm actually going to walk around this in case anybody falls asleep. I'm very happy to be here, and I am impressed that when Scott said Beaulieu, I said, oh my gosh, I haven't heard that correctly pronounced in the South a long time, You know, if you're from the South of the U.S., they think of you, if you heard of Beaufort, South Carolina, they usually say, Beaulieu. I said, no, it's Beau. Anyway, it's been 35 years of trying to teach people in the South how to speak French, and that hasn't worked. So that's why I say Beaulieu when I'm in the country, in the U.S. Good afternoon, and I want to share with you a few things about what we've been up to that we hope have application or might have some relevance to your work. So I'm going to go through all these different things. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Purdue Center for Regional Development. Scott was nice enough not to say very much, so I could talk to you about it. I'm going to then talk about this call for rural collaboration, for regional, to look at how can rural communities think and act regionally. Third of all, this whole notion of regionalism was what really precipitated the launch of the Stronger Economies Together, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. What are some of the key components? The focus on data, because we let data be, at least initially, one of the things that helps people expand the horizons on what their economic activities are all about. And I'll talk about what some things have happened to date. And then, of course, like anything else, not everything has worked out well. And I'll be really upfront with you about what the challenges have been for us as we launch this program across the country in the U.S. So please, at any time, interrupt. Unless you're throwing things at me, don't do that. But if you had, and I just noticed you have a lot of apples. Oh gosh, I'm in trouble now. Tomatoes are a lot softer, so if you had tomatoes, I'd be a little bit less concerned. But anyway, I thought I'd give you a beautiful green grass picture, which is really not what it is today. It's actually brown. We're not quite there yet. But to the left is the Purdue Center for Regional Development. I wish I could tell you we have that whole building, but we don't. It is on a part of campus at Purdue University. Purdue University is a land-grant institution. So we are engaged in research, teaching, and outreach. And that's all part of our mission. The left side, though, is this whole building is part of a unit on campus called Discovery Park. And for what that means is that one of our prior presidents decided that not only do we need to do good work, we need to make sure that we provide discovery and reach out to the broader population, to communities, to businesses, to the world, to help promote the kind of innovations we're doing. And Discovery Park became kind of an interdisciplinary environment for helping advance that kind of work. And we happen to be, again, on that building on the left, we have a nice office suite. When they did interview me about a year ago, a half ago, and Scott said I was at Florida, they said, "Bo, you know what? The winters really aren't that bad." And of course, we had twice as much snow this year as they've had in 35, 40 years. Norm probably knows. I guess are you in D.C.?
No, North New York.
New York. Well, they got badger too. So we had the worst winter I can imagine. And more than one time, my wife said, "Well, why did we come here? Whose idea was this?" You know? But it was but Purdue drew us back. Just for the sake of at least to help set an understanding where we are here at PCRD, we are part of the Purdue's Office of Engagement. About 10, 12 years ago, the university decided not only do we want to promote good research and good teaching, we want to make sure that we really create a much more, we create as one of the third leg engagement. We really want to get serious about the fact that we're promoting the university being a resource and a value to people in the state of Indiana, in the United States, and in the world. And this was a big change, a very, very big change, because usually this was something that the College of Agriculture typically did as part of its land grant mission. But they expect the College of Business, the vet school, health and human sciences, engineering, on and on, to have all the colleges buy into the fact that you've got to be involved in outreach. It was a big deal. It was a big structural change. And this has really, really been, I mean, there'll been some glitches, but basically it's really exciting to be part of a university that really takes this engagement seriously. And for those who are in an academic situation, I talked to Scott and Jeff about it last night, that meant that if you're a university professor and you're doing engagement, you will get rewarded for doing superior work in engagement. You don't have to only have 55 publications and highly refereed journals. And that's quite a message to say to university faculty that we really value your engagement work. The thing here is, I think Allison, is Allison still here by chance? You're on? Okay. We have a small business development center that very much emulates what you shared about your center. We have two of them that are tied to our PCRD. These are really people who are doing on-the-ground work with startups, helping find capital. Like one of our centers last year had $123 million in capital infusion that it was able to capture. It was #1 in the state of Indiana out of 10 small business development centers. But we have two of them that are tied to our center, which really helps us, again, have a link to the business community, to people who are starting out, to entrepreneurs, and we really, really value that. Then finally, we have the EDA University Center. EDA is the Economic Development Administration, a federal agency, and they have funded university centers in every state in the country, in the U.S. So what it does, again, it's another evidence of investment by the federal government in universities. We have a commitment to outreach with the business community. So when I got there about a year ago, we didn't really have a well-articulated mission, so we really struggled, but we decided this is really our mission, to pioneer new ideas and strategies that contribute to regional collaboration, innovation, and prosperity. In other words, how can we help regions think regionally and also be able to promote innovation? And we're trying through the university to introduce them to new ideas and new ways of doing business in hopes that they can really be prosperous over long term. We also decided that we had 4 major priorities that we wanted to focus on. A, data for decision makers. We have to also say in a language where people can understand it. Well, what do I mean by that? I know you're not guilty of this, particularly those who are at universities, but we give decision makers a lot of data a lot of times, and we tend to think, you know what, they're going to be able to figure out what this means. Well, the reality is they don't quite know what it means, not because they're not smart, but it's just a bunch of data. And they say, you know what, I love this, but tell me what it means. Are there any local officials here who get data from universities who agree with that? All right, Craig, what do you get it?
Tables and charts.
Okay. Not even bar charts, not even color. Excel spreadsheets. I told you I was going to pick on you. This is a township person. How about you? What do you get from us?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. We don't get a lot of real-world applications. It's just data.
Okay. And I know Ray. Where's Ray? Ray has probably been Ray probably spent a history trying to make sure that data were translated in ways that decision makers can use it. And so this may seem very simple, but it's not simple. It's how can we communicate the best information, in a way that's most meaningful to decision makers. Anybody else have any comment about that? I told them I'd try to make it interactive so I'll keep everybody awake here. So we talked about data. Second of all is how do we build collaborative leadership? I think you will agree that it's pretty hard to get sometimes local officials to meet with officials from contiguous counties or communities or townships to get together and think together. It's not an easy process. So we're talking about how do we build this collaboration? How do we create a spirit of working together on important challenges that we face? The third thing is how do we build strong strategies and planning? That's the third thing we do. And fourth thing is how do we then look at economic development options and business growth? So those are the four kind of focus areas we've identified. And what it does now is it helps us communicate to our public what it is what's raison d'etre, why do we exist, what are the priorities in which we carry out our work. So let me move on then to thinking and acting regionally. By the way, I hope you don't mind me being on the floor since I'm so tall. I know you'll be able to easily see me. By the way, I had dinner with Scott and Jeff last night. I said, do you have to be tall to work here? You know, because I'm 5'7", and I come in and these guys are just, how tall are you? 6'2", and Jeff is probably as equally tall. And Scott said it was a requirement of working for his center. You got to be tall. But anyway, so it makes me, but I'm old enough to know who cares. I'm 5'7", who cares? So how do you think and act regionally? This is the Secretary of Agriculture in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. I'm not sure if any of you have heard about Tom Vilsack. You probably don't have any reason to know Tom Vilsack. I love giving this guy a hard time. He has to follow me all over the place on the video. Tom Vilsack was, I didn't know this until recently. He came to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and gave a talk that I was at. He's orphaned. He was an orphaned child. He was actually, he was adopted by his parents. They moved to Iowa. He's became a mayor of a small town, very much like the towns, the cities, and the hamlets and townships you're talking about here, very small in Iowa. So you get to know not only agriculture, but you got to realize the value and importance of rural places. And I tell you what, I've been working in this area for about 37 years, and there aren't too many secretaries of agriculture in my lifetime who got it. Who got that rural is not only ag. Ag is important, but there's a lot more to rural than ag, and he gets it. And so the kinds of policies and programs he's implemented has really made a difference. He also became the governor of Iowa, who had very successful governor for 2 terms in the state of Iowa. But here's what he said. He said he's come to the conclusion that the economy of the future in rural places will really rest on the ability to think regionally, to look at creating a regional economy. Now, this is from a Secretary of Agriculture who probably took a lot of heat for making that comment, but he truly believed that regional approach is one way, a smart way that rural communities can really promote a strong rural economy for the future. So it was out of that came 3 or 4 programs. It was that kind of advocacy on his part, him setting the stage for regionalism, that there was, first of all, a program called Partnership for Sustainable Communities. 45 regions were funded, but it was promoted by the HUD, Housing and Urban Development, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Transportation. Those were 3 federal agencies who came together to support this program. But the only problem is that they said, oh, by the way, we also are investing in rural America, any community of 500,000 or less. I don't know about you, but that ain't rural. Okay, so HUD had a very, very biased, very urban orientation is what constituted rural. Then we have a Job and Innovation Accelerator Challenge. A number of federal agencies came together. One thing the Obama administration has done, whether you like his politics or not, is that he really advocating that federal agencies should not work at cross purposes, but should pool their money to invest in innovation. So this Rural Job and Innovation Program was one that involved a number of different agencies, including USDA, so they had a little piece of the pie. The third thing was the Great Regions, where Secretary Vilsack advocated regional federal agencies working in a much more integrated way to target specific regions across the country. And the fourth thing was a program I'm talking about today, 55 regions called Strong Economies Together. And I gotta tell you, the investment made in these 3 other programs are significantly higher than what was done in SET. SET was funded to the tune of $2 million. Everything else was invested at multi-million-dollar level among these regions. And so I'm really pleased to share with you some of the fact that we've really made some significant strides at a very, very modest cost. So let me talk a little bit then now about SET. It was an initiative that we launched in 2010 by the U.S. Department of Agriculture as a rural development mission area. We have different areas of USDA, but this is rural development. And they did this in partnership with 4 of the nation's regional rural development centers. We have 4 of them in the U.S. I happen to have been the director of the Southern Rural Development Center located at Mississippi State. And in that capacity, I worked with all the land-grant universities, 29 of them, across 13 southern states, anywhere from Virginia all the way to Texas. So we were the lead agency, so that's why I can talk about SET and have such a passion for it. And I became, when I left for Purdue, I was able to, because I was really the PI on it, they asked me to continue through the PCRD, through Purdue Center for Regional Development in 2013. So what is the purpose of SET? Really is to help rural communities and counties work together as in a collaboration to develop a high-quality regional plan that builds on their economic advantages, their economic strengths. Easy to say, harder than the dickens to do, okay? High-quality plan. We've had 4 phases of this program, and I'll tell you that in a minute, but when we say, well, what do you mean by a high-quality plan? We actually had 15-point components of what a high-quality plan constitutes, but here's the major categories. It has to be evidence-based. In other words, we're not doing economic development because we think we should be doing this. It's really, what do the data say? What do we know from our information that really gives us some sense about the kind of economic development activities we should be pursuing, but our economic assets. Second of all, is it practical? Can we do it? Is it doable? You know, you can aspire to things, but you got to be practical. Can it be done with a reasonable amount of resources without, spending everything you have in the bank? Thirdly, is it broadly supported? And I'll tell you that in a minute. That was a challenge. Fourth, is it focused on regional development? And finally, is it consistent with the vision and goals that the region has for itself? So those were really the 5 key aspects of building a high-quality plan, and it's been tough going for some of these regions. But I do want to say, though, the message I want to make, and a lot of times when we talk to decision makers about a regional approach, they get a little bit nervous. Because they say, well, you know what, we already got a local economic development plan. What are you meddling for? And the point we've got to make is that it's not an either or. You can have a very solid economic plan for your county, for your community, and we honor that. We don't say put it on the shelf and forget it. We say we want to honor that, but there's a value added when you think also regionally. New opportunities emerge that you probably don't see when you're working only on the county or community level. So that's why we think it's complementary. It's not duplicative, but really adding value to that. So why do we launch SET? This is a nice map that nobody can really figure out what the heck it all means. The Economic Development Administration has economic development districts. And these are all the districts, all that dark red and pink. The only differentiation is one of them is National Association of Development Organizations, NATO. Really works closely with all these economic development districts, and they have a color-coded as to whether you are or are not a NATO member, okay? And anything that's white are places that don't have an economic development district. So we have 10 of them in the U.S. EDA gives them about $50,000 a year to work on the economic development plan. The only problem is that it's very, very much urban-oriented. You may have rural counties involved, but their message or their needs are oftentimes overlooked. It's dominated by the urban constituency. So rural development was really concerned that all these regions were really not paying attention to the rural voice. So we began to launch SET. Now, why do we do that? This is a map of the United States that divides counties by 3 different designations: metro, and then we have non-metro, which would be the more rural ones, but they've now been subdivided recently, in 2003 actually, into 2 more categories: non-metro micropolitan and non-metropolitan non-core. Now, I know this is all jargon for you. The non-core are the most rural counties. They have no city or community of 10,000 or more. It's less than 10,000 people. no city of more than 10,000. And the micropolitan has cities of 10,000 to just under 50,000. That's micropolitan, okay? Well, look at the numbers. I don't know if you can see it there, but roughly 42% of all counties in the United States, and we have 3,143 counties, 42% are non-core. Their voice is not being heard. Being dominated by the 30-some-odd% that are metropolitan. So what we did is we started set. This is unfortunately I have a new webmaster who likes these really colorful maps there. A little bit pastel, what we call it. So here we have the 4 phases of set. Started 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. These are still pretty much ongoing, but we launched this across the country, and we are now in 28 states. These are the regions, 55 regions that were designated as set regions, and you can see, again, the color. By the way, where we have the stripes mean that they've actually been involved in more than one phase. They actually, like Texas has been involved both in phase 2 and phase 4. They came back for more punishment, I think, after phase 2. One thing I want to share with you is that how did we decide on these regions? We had nothing to do with it. When I say we, I mean the team that's involved in this at the national level. It was totally ground up. When we selected, we had states, not to get into too much minutia here. Initially, we invited states to be part of SET, and those who accepted, we then said, okay, go out and see if you can find communities and counties that want to think regionally. So then it got to be such a popular program that we had more people demanding, or states demanding to be part of SET than what we could handle, so they had to go through an application process in year 3 and year 4. But when they got selected, they had to go out and communicate to communities, counties, and regions. You have an opportunity to be part of the strong economies together. You figure out what your configuration is, how you want to come together. So it was all organic. So the regions were defined by the applicants. And then when they finally did get selected, if they got selected, these regions applied, and then we selected regions, take it back. These regions applied, they were then evaluated at the state level, and then those state partner teams, there's a team here that really reviewed everything, they then put the applicant, they submitted their top candidates to the federal level. I was part of the federal team that actually reviewed those. 99% of the time we accepted what these states had recommended, because we really value their voice. So anyway, that's kind of how it began. So totally organic, nothing top down. Did we succeed in reaching out to the right people? This is a map of our types of counties that were involved. We wanted to make sure that Metro was not completely left out, because we know some regions were so linked to their metropolitan area that they had to have them in there. But roughly 80% of all the counties that are involved in the SET program today are non-metro counties. So we really did succeed. And they were not necessarily easy counties to deal with. These are what were some of the challenges. We had about 31% that were low education counties. That means they had a fairly sizable percent of people with less than a high school education. We had about half of them that were low employment, which means they had a much lower proportion of people who were actually actively employed in the workforce. High poverty, persistent poverty, been 20% in poverty for 40 years or more, okay, of individuals. Population loss, so we had population regions, about 26% had been losing population. And finally, I put in manufacturing dependent. I don't mean that in a negative sense, but these were counties that had been dependent on the manufacturing sector that were really closing down. Textile, the apparel industries, those are really durable goods. So those were the challenges. So in other words, I guess the point I wanted to make is that SET did not get involved in working in counties that were the cream of the crop. These were not the cream of the crop. These were really regions who had been facing some monumental challenges. So what are the key components? I'm going to kind of go through this quickly, because I've given you a handout that really provides a much detailed description of all the content associated with SET. It's about 30 hours of training. So the steps of SET are these. One is to organize a team, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Second, look at really good data. Bring the best information you can to the table for them to look at, but do it in a way that's really helpful to them. Third, from that they build vision goals, they'll look at assets, and then they build a regional plan. And I'll talk to you about this in just a second. So the first thing is a team. I got to tell you that when we start, almost from phase 1 and phase 2 in particular, if you would apply for a program like this, who do you think would be the people at the table saying we want to be part of SET. In fact, of these groups, and by the way, LEADOs is local economic development organizations, and REDOs is regional economic development organizations. An acronym we use a lot in the States that probably makes no sense to you, but LEADOs and REDOs. And well, who do you think would be at the table for those who applied initially? Who's that? The REDOs and LEADOs? Absolutely. They were one of the, who else is there? Ray, who do you think would be there? Government. Absolutely, almost all of them were LEADOs in government. And we said, you know what? A regional economic development plan is not only something that the local economic development organizations and local government should be concerned about. You should have the whole community engaged, the whole region. So we said, you know what? You got to have health, education. I mean, believe it or not, here we are talking about the economic development plan. They hardly had anybody from business and industry at the table. And that makes much sense. We're talking about economic development and the people who are part of the drivers of your economy are at the table without a voice. So we say you got to have business and industry. You got to have the faith-based community. You have to have your nonprofits. You have to have health. You have to have education. You have to really have the voices of all components at the table. And that was not easy. So that was the first thing, is broadening the base. Inclusiveness was really the day, was something that we were really advocating as part of the SET program. Second of all is data. Like I said earlier, very, very hard for decision makers to really gloss over. Their eyes get foggy when they began looking at tables and tables of data. So we began to translate data into very visually pleasing, very informative process. They have really liked these kinds of demographic profiles that really give them a glimpse of what their community or county or that region is all about. A lot of times they don't think regionally, so they don't really recognize what some of the assets are. And so, for example, here we have the population pyramid we can look at over time. And it really awakens their mindset about, wow, I can't believe how a population is really being restructured that has a tremendous amount of economic development opportunities. The second thing, which is where Norman's probably going to have a conniption here, when you talk about clusters. The other thing we tell them, what is your competitive strength? So we look at industry clusters. Something, by the way, that we at PCRD helped work with EMSIs, which is a company out of Idaho in the U.S. We help them organize industry clusters, and we have 22 of them that we've been able to identify. So these are clusters of industries that kind of hang together. And so we have, for example, here, a cluster that's energy, both fossil and renewable. And what we're looking at is these are those components of their regional economy in which they have a competitive strength. They have a higher concentration of these industries relative to the United States. Okay? So for here, it means they actually, this is what they call a location quotient. Not to get too much technicality here, but that LQ of 2.38% means that it has about 2.4% more concentration in that cluster than the U.S. does. So it begins, and that has, anything that high has export capability. So it gives them a better understanding of what really is driving their regional economy, and helps them think differently. Because what happens, ladies and gentlemen, is a lot of the LEADOs and REDOs I just spoke about, they're in the business of trying to recruit companies to come, and they don't always have the best idea of what's going to fit. So it's like taking, a set of sticky, I don't know if you have I don't know if you call something sticking, I guess, on your hand, and just throw it against the wall and say, let's hope something sticks. Because that's about as scientific as it is in some of these local groups. They're not really thinking about, they just want to get anything. Just because their metric is how many jobs have I created. Is it good jobs? Well, that's probably not what we're worried about. I'd have to prove to my board that I've created new jobs. So we're talking about thinking much more logically about what kinds of activities or industries you're looking for. So this is what and here will be industries that have become more, they're really they're becoming more mature. They're still high. Anything here above this line is they're competitive, but this is they're changing over time. They're getting weaker. So you got to think about, okay, is that something we want to save, or do we just try to let it? That maybe not our future. And here are our industries that really are getting stronger, and we call them emerging. These may be new opportunities for the future, like business and financial services. So anyway, so I know it gets a little bit technical, but we're walking them, we're sitting down with them, we're really helping them understand how to digest this information. And we give them other things as well, but I just want to kind of give you a flavor of that. The third thing we do, for example, these are those clusters. We look at how much is that cluster purchasing products and services in the region, and how much of it is it importing. So here we have an energy cluster that was really important in this previous slide, and it shows you the red is how much is actually being satisfied outside the region. And I think Norm is right. There's going to be some of that just simply because of the way in which open innovation, it's just like we're never going to be able to meet some of those demands. But we're asking them to go back and look at where are those leakages and where can you begin to think about ways to fill those gaps. So we give them stuff like this on that energy. On that energy, we really dig in deep about here's all the things that are part of that cluster, and this is how much of it is being satisfied within the region. And they as a region, as a group, have decided, are there any of these that we really have ability to help fill the gap? To import substitution is a word we're talking about here. Can we create some value to add to that cluster in a way that's really, really valuable to the region? And let me give you a very simple, off-the-hand example. I was in a place in southern Indiana near Louisville. I used to say Louisville, but they told me it's going to be Louisville. So north of Louisville is southern Indiana. New Albany is a very up-and-coming community, and it's really become very interested in microbreweries. Okay, so they're building. It's also very touristy and whatnot. It's right on the river. So we went down and our small business development center, in fact, they helped provide capital, find capital for this microbrewery to start. It's going very well. So I just asked, where's the bottles for the microbrewery being purchased? And they said, well, we're purchasing those in Ohio. Okay? Which is, okay, that's not bad, but why Ohio? Come to find out, there's a bottling company just outside town, the next county over, perfectly capable of producing the bottles of that microbrewery is needing. And said, well, why don't we better connect the capacity of our region? Now, granted, that's just one example, but it changes the mindset about how do we help identify ways to, again, to find products and services that really are aligned with some of our economic strengths, but in a way that reduces our dependence on outside imports. So it's with that team in place, the data, that's when they began to build their vision goals, identify assets. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Cornelia Flora and Jan Flora, both out of Iowa State. They've done a thing called community capitals, and we had them go through there. What's your cultural capital? What's your political capital? What's your social capital? What's your human capital? There's 7 capitals, and we actually literally go through there and help them identify where are your assets in these different arenas, and what are the ones that could be impediments. And when we talk about entrepreneurship, for example, one of the biggest impediments may be political. We may not have a political structure in place that allows entrepreneurship to thrive. Or we may not have the financial capital to allow investments in these kinds of entrepreneurship activities to be carried out. So it helps them think of the whole spectrum of assets that they need to have in place to really help promote these. And so again, this is really getting to the point that what we do is with the data, look at import substitution opportunities, which one might we be able to really fill the gap in, and then how do we get that done? Now, for those of you who are sophisticated economists or economic developers, you may not like this simple terminology, but when you deal with a lot of local government officials who really aren't necessarily the economic development, they're not really strong, a lot of them aren't really well trained in economic development, particularly in rural areas, we say, look, think about it clearly just as a care model, okay? And many of you are involved in attraction. You're trying to recruit industries to come to your community, and we're saying there's three other parts to that leg, to that four-legged stool. It's both creation, retention, and expansion. And we're saying what we find is that most of them are spending most of their money and time here on recruitment, on attracting companies, and at the expense of thinking this way. So we said, you know what? You're spending a whole lot of money trying to attract business and giving them all sorts of inducements. Now, if I've been in your community for a long time and I see you doing that, and I'm a business person, I'm going to be ticked. Frankly, I'm going to be mad. And we said, why aren't you not? Like, I've been here for a long time. I've been a contributor to this community. Why don't you try to find incentives for me to grow my business? And so we're getting more and more of them to think about, look at what you have, build on those, and try to find ways in which you can grow that business and industry. Whether it's aligned with that cluster or not, but there may be some ways in which you can find room that have a competitive edge. And we're doing that. And we're introducing, I want to build on what Norman said, we're introducing to them to much better understanding of first, second stage firms, and even to zero stage firms, which would be the self-employed. A lot of these communities in rural America have a lot of self-employed people, and we're trying to help them. What do you do to help strengthen a self-employed person in the hopes that he or she can not only get stronger, but may hire 1 or 2 people? And the first stage firms have 2 to 9 people, and second stage firms have 10 to 99 people. And those 3, zero, first, and second stage firms are the bulk of the kinds of businesses and industries you have in rural areas. And I bet you probably have that here too. And we're saying, how can we help promote and strengthen what they do? So we're really helping our rural communities to refocus. Forget about the big stage 4, 500 plus employees. They ain't gonna come. That's French isn't gonna come. They're not gonna come. Very, very hard to come. So what you gotta do is look at where you can really build strength. So let me finish up by telling you a little bit about impacts. These are not, I won't say they're dramatic yet, because we've been at this for about 3 years. I'll tell you first of all, we started in 2010. Phase 1 and Phase 2, we were about, frankly, Phase 1 was I won't say it was a disaster, but none of us knew what we were doing. You know, to be perfectly honest, because we were starting a new program that had a lot of, they were pioneers. We were pioneers, they were pioneers, the regions that did this. But we figured out what was going right, what was going wrong, and we got better over time. So today, Phase 4 is really, really effective. And we're getting more and more of these regions to really build a high-quality regional plan that's really making an impact. So here's a little bit of an example. One thing we want to do is say, okay, we got communities that need to band together and think regionally. We have about 27 regional groups that never were there before who now organize and become institutionalized. They become a formal organization. So they're there for the long term. It has sustainability. Second of all, we have about, I told you about the importance we put into building a strong, inclusive regional team. Out of the 55 regions, we had about, initially, 837 people at the table. It grew by 1,600. We had almost a 200% increase in the number of people at the table who were involved in helping build a high-quality regional plan. And these were people who represented a more diverse set of players. So it really did make it much more comprehensive. Plans are coming along, 10. Number of jobs created, 183. That doesn't sound like there's only two regions that have actually reported. It's really hard to be able to document that we help create jobs. We have 183. I don't know, if you assume that, maybe I'm being very ambitious, 50,000 on average, that may be about 9 million. If you say no, probably 30,000, you can still see the math in terms of what impact we've had in terms of jobs. Most important thing is they've been able to about $6.8 million now they've captured. Now keep in mind we put $2 million into this thing. We're already now direct return about $3+ per dollar invested by the federal government, and that's a pretty good return on their investment, at least so far. We're not all there yet. Then finally we said, what's the sustainability? Here's the groups that came together. This is how many are still in play. So we have sustainability. So not only have we, and a lot of times when you get these groups, it's like, when we get done with the plan, we're gone. No, this is really there. They're helping make this happen. Let me give you a final set of the so what's. President Obama in January identified 5 promise zones. He actually he created these promise zones almost modeled after the Harlem promise zones in Harlem, New York. Very, very successful program. So he launched these promise zones. There were 5 of them. 3 of them were urban, like LA, and I believe one was Houston, and 2 of them were rural. The 2 rural ones were both involved in the Strong Economies Together program. So President Obama, they even recognized the value of these regional groups that we've helped organize, that they really are making a difference, because many of them are really impoverished areas. And finally, USDA identified strike force regions. 20 regions to date have been identified by USDA. These are poverty areas of which the federal government, USDA, and other agencies are going to be making a concerted effort to work in partnership with these regions to make sure the resources and capabilities of the federal government are delivered in a much more integrated way to these 20 regions. 16 of those 20 regions have been part of the Strong Economies Together program. So we really think at the federal level, this kind of program that started with $2 million has really had a pretty important impact at the national level, and we're really, really proud of that. Finally, what are the challenges? Well, I know you won't believe this, but traditional people don't want some of these people at the table. You know, they're pretty comfortable being the decision makers, and they don't want to open up to other people to have a voice. You know, we have this term in the U.S., and you may have it here, called STP, same 10 people. Okay, and I've been in Southern Indiana the last couple weeks, and people said, well, what we need is about 10 untimely deaths. You know? Now, maybe not untimely, but maybe timely. In other words, maybe people dying a little bit will be helpful to help the regions really grow. I know that's a morbid statement, I know, but I apologize. But the fact is, we do have people who are not giving up leadership roles, and so part of the challenge we have was trying to get them to open up. And I'll pick on my Indiana. We had a region in Indiana, and the local economic development groups and local government people said, we got this under control. We don't need anybody else. We know what's going on. Other people don't know anything about economic development, so we don't want them at the table. So anyway, that was a real bummer. Getting leaders to embrace regional strategies. We have counties in Indiana or in the U.S. are pretty strong. And it's really, really hard for them to come to the table and to let all the divisiveness and the adversarial relationships and the fighting each other for companies to come to that, to attract companies. It's really, really hard to get them to change to one where we're going to work together. And sometimes, not that this happens in Canada, but in the United States, it all depends on what happens on a football weekend or a basketball weekend as to whether they're going to, I mean, seriously, this is unreal. Sports can actually divide counties based upon how bad they were beaten in football. Norm, you probably agree with that, right? So, but we got to get leaders to embrace regional strategy. So that's been a challenge, and some of them have really gone full speed ahead and have done a very good job. Federal cutbacks. USDA Rural Development is a critical player with us, the land-grant universities, and with the regional rural development centers and PCRD. But they took a couple of hits the last couple of years. Now things have gotten back better. But because of that, they were not able to be full players, and that really hurt us in terms of having a strong rural development presence. Finding people with the right skills to do training and coaching. Again, part of what we do is our land-grant universities are there working hand-in-hand with these regions, 25, 30 hours of training, and then an additional year of on-the-ground work. Much like Scott, you guys are doing with your communities. We really are there for long-term, helping build capacity, help them really build the kind of strengths they need to really make a difference. And we have trouble finding people with the kind of technical skills to go through some of the data. Finally, getting people engaged and committed. It's a long-term process. Some of them want the answers right away. They're not very patient, and that doesn't happen quickly. And finally, producing that regional plan is really critical. And then, how are we going to document impact? We don't have a lot of people who really, we as researchers want to make sure that we build good metrics. Some people in the community could care who about our metrics. They just want to get the job done, and they don't care whether we've been able to document the growth and how many people are there, what the impact has been. Finally, I think we tell these communities you have two choices. A, get out of my sandbox, I don't want to play with you. Or let's work together and make things better for our region. So that's the turn now. I don't know how much time I have. Scott?
So if you'll go up there and answer your questions from up there.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for my water.
Chef.
Trying to figure out what happened to my water.
Again, first question's always in the back.
Is that it? Oh, that may be it, yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you're awake back there.
It was a really great presentation. It wasn't hard to stay awake. I was just looking at your Promoting Regional Innovation in Rural Communities document that you touched on. And I wondered if you could comment on the Rural Broadband Investment Program and what role it played in terms of enabling the communities to communicate together or connect better.
No, which one are you talking about? I have that on that set thing?
Sorry, it's in the document called Promoting Regional Innovation in Rural Communities, and it's called the Rural Investment Program. And it's a $3.4 million program to provide 19 technical assistance projects. Part of the rural development, rural utilities.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's part of the federal agency. That would not be part of SET, but rural development has a portion of their program is called the Rural Utility Services. And they have been in the business of trying to provide funding to rural communities to help strengthen their infrastructure. And so they're investing in, a lot of times it's really low interest loan programs. So that's one of the federal agencies that are very heavily involved in infrastructure enhancement. When the Obama administration did this stimulus, when they put some fairly significant money into many of the federal budgets to try to really get the economy out of the doldrums. RUS got a good amount of money and was able to invest that, along with the National Telecommunication Information Administration, NTIA, National Telecommunications Information Administration. They put big bucks into helping invest in infrastructure. Okay. So RUS would be the ones that would deal on the rural side, and NTIA dealt more on the urban side. Norm, I don't know if you have any. And so this was really I mean, I know people complained about this. It just seems to be a waste of money. I don't know if Norma would agree, but this is an investment for the future. You know, you don't get a quick return on putting broadband in rural America, but my gosh, the benefits to be accrued over time are sizable. As many of you heard today in some of the presentations, they're significant. So that's what that's all about. We didn't have any role about that, but I can tell you some of our regional teams that came together did identify broadband as critical and have been promoting. We have it in Washington State, got secured money. We have some of our tribal nations in the Arizona area came together. 2 tribal nations that have never worked together in the history of these reservations got them at a table together to think about how do we promote broadband availability in our tribal nation areas. Very, very significant. So broadband's been one of those, but I don't know if that doesn't really answer your question. I want to say that RUS is really a federal agency that's been involved in that. Norm, I don't know if you have any comments on that at all that you want to add?
Yeah, there's been an announcement about a more recent additional investment in rural.
He says another regional additional investment coming out of RUS.
Yeah, coming out of our U.S. and this is very important, and it ties into what you're doing. I mean, if you think about it, if you have the broadband, you can create out of a regional set of rural counties a virtual city, if you will, compete against real physical cities without the density.
Yeah. And let me tell you, RUS is right now, they've actually approached us and said, look, you've got 55 regions across the country. These are ideal settings for us to really do innovation. And so they'll now begin to look at, can we pilot one of these programs to really invest in broadband? And they're actually looking at northern and New York City. Not New York City, upper state New York, where we had a SEP region. RUS is looking at the possibility of creating a program to promote broadband using that regional team as the conduit.
That, by the way, is just the other side of the border from Ontario.
Yeah.
I've always wondered why there hasn't been more cooperation between those 2 areas. That's a separate question.
Right here, Helen.
Bo, can you just, on the back of that handout that you gave us, when I look at this as a professor, I see a training curriculum, like an educational curriculum.
Right.
And can you tell us how this works? Would SET go into the communities that are involved in the region and work through this process of roughly 25 hours of time? Okay, it's not done online. There's no virtual classroom.
Exactly. See, again, because of our connection to the land grant university, every place if we're in a state, if a state was accepted, it was done with the proviso that the USDA has an RD office in every state. USDA RD has a state office. That state office, in partnership with the land grant university in that state, have agreed to work as partners in helping deliver that program at whatever regions have been designated in their state. So we have on-the-ground presence. They literally are the ones who are doing the training, the coaching, the technical assistance, and whatnot. So yeah, that's what the value of this has been. It's not been online. It's been there, really working hand in hand with them.
Yeah, I'm in a program called Capacity Development Extension, and so we don't have these kinds of extension workers in Ontario any longer, these public people, like the land-grant universities have in the US where they can go out and do this. But we're looking at using digital technologies to
Right.
be able to do this again. So the idea would be to create like a refresher school on topics like rural broadband deployment
Right.
and help municipal stakeholders and regional stakeholders to actually get up to speed on these issues, because it's a pretty complex area. And that's where we see this digital development being really important for the future of education of the next generation of public servants.
I tell you what we're doing, and I think your point is very well taken. What we found out from the evaluations is that people really like it, but they want to act. They want to get their hands dirty. They want to begin doing things, and they're not really patient about hearing about what SMART goals are and how do we build a vision and whatnot. How do you they like the data, but they'd rather leave it to a smaller group of people who are really some of you out there in the audience will probably say, you know what, I get excited about data. Others will say, don't even get it close to me, okay? So we got to find the people on these regional teams who really thrive in data analysis and let them be the ones who communicate to other members of the team what it all means. We should not all be demographers, on that regional team. So we're trying to figure that out. But one thing we're trying to do next step is we're working with, actually we have a Discovery Learning Center at Purdue. I'm going to be meeting with them. They're the ones who are really looking at how do you innovate on web, online, and complement that with, so that when people come together in the regions, they will not be listening to a PowerPoint on a topic such as SMART goals, vision and goals. They will have already been introduced to that topic, and they're going to literally start acting. They're going to be doing, hands-on stuff, which really gets them very excited. So we're going to be doing that to try to see if we can build a new component of the SET program to see how that works. All the research Purdue's doing seems to indicate that kind of hybrid has really promoted big knowledge gain and capacity to really apply that knowledge in ways that are really innovative.
Going back to your point about getting people to collaborate and the challenges that can present, just because I know that I'm sure there's people in this room that are all too familiar with how hard that can sometimes be.
Yeah.
What's your response, or what do you usually do when you run into people that have the attitude of, this is my castle, that's your castle, I'll run my stuff, you run your stuff, and we'll just leave it like that. What's your best response to that?
Well, what we try to do is, again, we've been able to, with having the USDA Rural Development, the state agency, and the land grant at the table really helping coordinate this, we're able to build, take advantage of some of the relationships they built. So that helps. And we just say, look, there's going to be some regions who say, you know what, I don't want to do this. Then we just say, okay, well, you don't need to be part of this thing. Frankly, we have some regions where the local decision makers decided that they didn't want to do this. And guess what? This regional group still did a phenomenal job, and then they came back because they began to realize, you know what, this thing is not dying. Even though I don't want to be part of it, I'm realizing I better get on the bandwagon, or else they're going to move forward without me, and I don't want to have that happen. I want to be able to have a voice. So what happens over time? The reason why we don't like this situation where they come in and make decisions and quickly is social capital is critical. When you bring people together who've not had any history of working together, particularly when you bring counties together that have had no history of working together, they're naturally suspicious of one another. And over time, they begin to realize, you know what, we have a shared interest in this region, in our economy, in the well-being of our community. And all those barriers began to slowly erode, and they began to build relationships. We've documented all these new relationships that have been built, and some of the networking that has promoted other new things, unrelated to SET, but all because I got to know you and you and you, and I've been able to tap you in ways that are really important to the kind of work I'm doing in other arenas. Many of you who are researchers know about Granovet's work on the strength of weak ties. And that's the notion, is that the weak ties, in fact, if I'm a good friend with Scott, but Scott knows Yolande, but I don't know Yolande now becomes a resource to me because she's a weak tie to me, but she's a strong tie to Scott, and that weak tie gives me a broader array of people that I can tap whenever I'm trying to do good work. So this is what we've done with this program, is we've created strong social capital, both these strong ties and these weak ties, these kinds of relationships that we can tap for, again, to promote innovation. Hope that helps.
So we move on with it. If somebody's going to be a barrier, we just move on without them. Way back there.
Those results you were reporting on the PowerPoint, is what's the name of the document that those would be reported in? It's available to be downloaded?
This is really the data I just gave you about how many jobs created and whatnot. Actually, that was a report we just submitted to USDA Rural Development where we documented all that. What we did is we actually invited all of our regions to give us the data to help us figure out what, and that's on the PowerPoint. I don't know if there's no official report that's come out on this, only the internal reports that we submitted to USDA Rural Development. So, but if you want them, I'll be glad to get them to you. This PowerPoint will be available online, I believe, right?
Yeah, we'll make those PowerPoints available.
Yeah, would that help? But anyway, by the way, there's a link online to all this curriculum, and it's really detailed. We give not only we have instructors or a facilitator's guide that gives you detailed information if you're going to be presenting this, how to prepare for it. We have PowerPoints to give to the participants. We have support materials, worksheets. It's really, really comprehensive, something we've been developing over an extended period of time. So, again, we're always fine-tuning it. So anything you would have, if any of you look at it and say, you know what, Bo, I think there's something you're missing, let us know. We really are open to new ways to make this program useful. I think that's it. Is that it, or do you have one more or not?
One more question for you.
Oh, no, not Ray. He asked the tough questions.
I'll ask a question. The question is, how did the regions come together? Did they have to be contiguous? Could any group of counties form a region? Did you provide data to say, look, you are a functional region? How did they come together?
We did a couple things. One is that we gave them the data. First of all, we did want them to be contiguous as much as possible. We also allowed them to be cross-state. We have Vermont and New Hampshire that came together because they had a very strong cluster of agriculture in northern part of Vermont and New Hampshire that came together. We had the same thing in Colorado. We had Colorado and Arizona. And anyway, we had, so we allowed that to happen. We gave them data on every one of their counties with regard to what proportion of their population was rural. They had to meet the rural condition. Whatever aggregation you came up with, 51% of the population had to be rural. And if you didn't make that rural condition, you had to demonstrate that 75% of the land that you had in that region was rural, and every one of them pretty much made it. We tried not to have a metropolitan area that basically dominated everything. Okay. And was there anything else I missed, Ray?
Did you give any data on how functionally they work together?
In some cases, we did not dictate that, but what happened is when we gave them the data, the specialization where the industry cluster is there, we gave them stuff on industries and businesses and self-employment. When they began to look at all the data and they said, you know what, we really are missing a couple of counties, they were encouraged to involve those counties, and they did. So the structure they had as a region initially was always very dynamic. It could change over time. Nebraska, for example, wrote to us last week to say we're adding two new counties to our region because they felt they need to be involved because they created, again, it was an economic, a region that they felt needed to be hanging together. So, no, we didn't dictate that, even though we would have data that could tell you what the labor market areas looked like, So again, totally organic, totally locally driven. We didn't say that doesn't make any sense because but we let them decide, figure that out. So Scott, I think I'll be quiet now. Thank you so much for making this.
Well, there you go. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. That was fantastic, and it's wonderful how beautifully our two keynotes linked up very nicely together. A very good look at the future and a very good look at how to get to the future. So really very nicely done.